A bit suspicious. Here's another thing that I think is odd. I could be wearing a tinfoil hat, guys, and I could be overanalyzing this, but there is no layer number 1. This will be important later, so I want you to remember this, okay? When you make layers in Procreate, as you open up new layers, they will be numbered in the order that you made the layer. So if you open up and you make a new layer, it will say like layer 1. Then you make another one, it'll say layer 2, and it'll keep going onwards. Background color is separate, and that is default. There will always be a background color layer. I think you can maybe toggle that off. I've never done it. If we scroll through, the very bottom layer is layer 46, which is like fine, right? Because some people draw the background last, you drag it all the way to the bottom. I do that. But as you can see, the topmost layer is layer 17, 19, 13, 7, 9, 25. You know, you don't need me to read this out for you guys. And then she scrolls down a little bit. We can see these are all double-digit numbers, right? She scrolls. Okay, the lowest number here is an 8. Scrolls again, there's like a 5, there's a 3, there's a 6, that was the 5. There's no layer number 1. And another thing I want to point out that's really weird to me in the layers is that these layers look like, again, layers from somebody who's like faking an art process, because the things do not make sense. If you look at layers 4 and 5, layers 4 is the white of the left eye plus the entirety of the left iris. But it also has the white of the right eye, a little bit of yellow, I guess, for the iris. And then layer 5 has all of the shading for the left eye, but there's a big hole in the middle because the iris is on the layer below. But then on layer 5, it's all of the iris of the right eye. So it's just weird that they would do it like that, right? Layer 4 has all of one eyeball, except for some shading, and only half of the other eye. And then layer 5 has the other half of the other eye and some shading. That's just why it's odd to me. Like, again, if you do your layers like this, let me know in the comment section down below. There's just so many oddities in this person's art process that I don't personally believe that it is not AI. And then here we get the actual speed paint. So this is the drawing in of the sketch that I told you guys we were going to look at earlier. Now we get to look at how the sketch is drawn in. Okay, and this is, again, odd to me because, again, we have the entirety of the right eye that gets drawn in, and then almost all of the left eye, and then we draw in part of the face, and it kind of seems like she was like, oh shit, I forgot to draw the iris for the left eye. Let me go draw that in now. And then they draw the iris in. That's what I'm saying. Again, there are artists who legitimately draw piece by piece, right? Like eye first, then the... But then you would finish it, right? You would completely draw in the right eye and then move on to the left eye. I feel like forgetting the iris is quite a big thing. And then we have like the most elaborate face jewelry drawn in. Again, nothing else is drawn in. And another aspect that's quite suspicious is, again, right? Some people do draw like this. They do fully illustrate the sketch that so well that it could pass as line art, but things would have to change. Like after they do it, if they don't do the block method, right, where you draw a bunch of blocks and circles and then you fill it in and then make it more detailed, typically you're gonna have to change things. You're gonna have to liquefy a little bit. You're gonna have to resize the face. Maybe one eye is a little crooked. Maybe like the horn isn't exactly where you want it. But again, with this person, out the gate, the sketch is perfect. So good to the point where they can go straight into rendering. With such an elaborate sketch, I don't really believe that. And one thing that's odd to me as well is like the whites of the eyes aren't the same color. It's this very like, this one's a very gray, like mossy green color. This one's the more blue. Again, this is something that like if you have an extensive knowledge of color theory and how to blend characters into the environment, yada, 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 you can do this. You would know. But to me, this reads as color selecting because they're so similar and yet just slightly different in shade. That's why it's just suspicious to me. So yeah, the art process is quite weird. And then now here's what some other people have to say. And then we're going to go back and look at that account's other art pieces. So this is by an account by the name of Divya Soup.
This is such a perfect point because it perfectly illustrates why this isn't possible. No matter what you're drawing, you're bound to make adjustments as you go. Most people who do not do this are people who have been training for years and years, and this reflects for them in traditional art more than anything else. It is much easier to erase and use undo digitally than it is traditionally. And no matter what, if you are not tracing something, you will inevitably need to use the erase button or the undo button. And Procreate speed paints record every undo you do, which means that would be visible within the time lapse. The fact that it isn't directly shows this is tracing. Most people cannot draw so easily. Most people will make adjustments. I'm drawing this face to show that even someone who has been drawing for over a decade and has been to a literal art school is going to struggle to draw things perfectly the first time. There are adjustments I'm making. I'm not getting shapes perfectly. And considering the speed at which she is creating everything, there is absolutely going to be a mistake, which she will inevitably have to fix. Perfect lines are not possible. Large lines are not possible without undos. unless you are tracing off of something underneath. At the very least, I hope you guys can agree that this is not her original work. You might personally sketch in a different way than me, but no one can make a composition a fully rendered composition without doing some editing.
And remember how I told you that we never saw a layer number 1 in her set of layers? Again, it's not necessarily a smoking gun, right? She could have like done a base sketch and then deleted. Actually, no, that's not even true though, because we don't even see the sketch. Like we see the time lapse and there wasn't any. Anyways, I don't know. Maybe she made an empty blank layer number 1 and then deleted it and then made layer number 2 and then sketched on the second layer. It's a bit suspicious if you show us your layers. There is no layer number 1 and your sketch looks perfect out the gate and your rendering is perfect out the gate with not a single undo, modification, adjustment that you ever had to make to your artwork. And the process is very suspicious in the way that it's rendered, like piece by piece, not even piece by piece, it's like chunk by chunk. All of that to me is very suspicious, which is why I believe that piece was traced off of AI art. I actually do think that a good chunk of the brushstrokes might be organically made by the artist, but there is tracing of an AI piece involved in this. And I don't necessarily want to go straight down the list and like absolutely nitpick on somebody's art like that, but a lot of times when it comes to people with AI art accusations, we can look at their older pieces to see if there's like potential elements of like AI that was used in previous pieces. So we can see that their second most recent art piece they've done, because they just post like chunk by chunk of like what pieces they've made, is this illustration. So the caption reads, "The lines come to life and certain color will be added. What shades should I do?" And it's kind of like a drawing of a face, but it's extremely intricate, which again, it's a face and then there's like another eye and then there's something kind of like drooping off of it. And you're again telling me that there was no planning on this, as in like out the gate, you did one extremely elaborate sketch and it was perfect for a piece this intricate. And then here's the speed paint. There's like other videos that she's made about this, or this piece specifically. This speed paint again is odd to me for a number of reasons. It's a very patchwork set of work. You could argue, oh, okay, so, but like, because of the nature of how this piece looks like, right? It's one person with like a whole bunch of eyes. Maybe she's just doing eyeball by eyeball. That would make sense in theory, except this sketch is extremely elaborate with a lot of like guidelines in terms of like where to color in, but she doesn't even follow her own guidelines, which is why it's like odd to me. This chunk of the eye is drawn and then this chunk of the nose, but she doesn't connect the two, even though it's basically the same thing. There's just like a small sliver of like a white line running in between that will then later get blended in together, right? Like part of this eye has a pink highlight that continues down onto the nose. And then if you see here, there's a lot of these like S-shaped kind of like guidelines of where things are flowing on the face, but she doesn't even color within her own sketch guidelines that she spent that long drawing, which again is like, what's the point of making a sketch this elaborate if you don't use it? Which tells me that again, this person is likely tracing because they don't seem to kind of have an understanding of why things are done the way they're done. And again, look at the completed piece, right? The eye blends straight into the nose. So there was no point in not connecting them. That's why it just feels like there was kind of no understanding of why it should be done. But if you are the person that created the piece, you should know. All right, so over here, we have this alien piece, and this is like her most viral piece, I suppose, right? Somebody says, how many layers is that one? That's gorgeous, by the way. And they say, so far it's 35 layers. I'm not done yet in 9 hours painting. Personally, I would use much more layers, but that's just me. But again, I want you to notice like what is there. The topmost layer is layer number 3. There's no layer number 1 or 2 for that matter. That's why it's suspicious. Here's another piece of the video that they've made, that moment when you weren't planning on doing any serious sketching, and then bam, how did this happen? Another extremely, extremely, extremely elaborate sketch. And this is again kind of reminiscent of AI. Like to me, this sketch is AI generated for a couple of things that I'm gonna point out, right? Because again, there's like things that are there with no rhyme or reason. There's like swirls and lines that have no rhyme or reason for being here. Is I guess done to make it, or to make the art piece look quote unquote complex. But if you think a little bit more about why that brushstroke is there, it doesn't make very much sense. For one, like the random like